Men, are you willing to step into the gap? And what do I mean by the gap? The gap is the gap between evil and the people you love and care about, the people that are in your care. Because as a king, you are called. You have been given people to care for, to protect, and to provide for. Now, as a law enforcement officer, this shows up every single day that when we go to work, that's what we do. We step in the gap and protect people from physical and mental evil, harm, and all that comes in between. But as a Christian man, as a Christian law enforcement officer, are we doing this from a spiritual standpoint? Are you willing to do this from a spiritual standpoint in your home and in your community? Now, let's start at home. Are you willing to stand in the gap and be willing to not only pray over, but pray with your wife and your kids? And I get it. This gets tricky, especially working in law enforcement with weird hours, 12-hour shifts. The days are back and forth depending on where you work. It gets tricky, but it's possible, it's doable, and it's necessary. And you might be thinking, what's the big deal? You see the importance, but maybe you don't truly see the importance. And as imitators of Christ, this is what Jesus did for his disciples when he was getting arrested. In John 18, verse 4, it says, "Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, 'Whom do you seek?'" He came forward. He was with the group, with the disciples, and he stepped forward. He stepped into the gap between those that were betraying him and arresting him. And it goes on to say, "You have come for me. Let these guys go." So men, our job as imitators of Christ is to step into the gap. And there's lots of different ways we can do this as protectors and providers. Most of us know the physical and probably even the mental aspect of this. Literally, stepping in between you and or your wife, your kids, and someone that may be wanting to do physical harm. But we also have to be willing to step in the gap between our wife, our kids, the people in our care, and evil forces. So, as a law enforcement officer, what this looks like for me is, again, not only praying over my family, not only praying with my family, but when I'm working, I'm going to calls, I'm praying over the situation as I'm driving, as I'm moving towards that space, towards that situation, praying over the people involved. Now, it doesn't happen every time. I can admit that, because sometimes your mind's going to, what is going on? What has to happen when I show up? What am I expecting when I show up? But I can tell you from experience that the more times and the more often I'm able to pray before I get to a situation, the more likely that situation is going to be diffused on the way there, when I get there, and the potential for it to be blown up and shit to go sideways real fast decreases. And I specifically do this when dealing with mental health patients or mental health situations. Because me personally, I don't believe that it's a mental health situation. It's a spiritual situation, and there's demons that are involved in the situation. So men, we have to be willing to step into the gap from not just a physical, not just a mental aspect, but a spiritual aspect. We have to be willing to pray against the people in our care, whether that's just your wife and your kids, or whether that's the people in your community because you're a law enforcement officer or other person that, other first responder, what have you. We have to be willing to step into the gap in every aspect, in every area of our lives. We can't just focus on the physical. We can't just focus on the mental when there is a spiritual battle out there. We know this. The Bible says it. So I'm encouraging you to step into the gap. And as you step into the gap with your physical presence, with your mental abilities, your verbal abilities, also step into the gap from a spiritual aspect, because this can change the dynamic of every situation. God bless, and I love you.